I'm Kevin Arba. I'm an astrologer, a coach, and a healer. If you're interested in connecting with me, if you have any questions, any comments, if you're interested in a reading or you're curious about what a reading even is, if you have anything you want to say to me at all, by all means, just reach out to me. You can email me at info@cosmicintegrationhealing.com. You can also check out my website, cosmicintegrationhealing.com. I'm happy to have a conversation with anybody. It's free of charge. I love talking about this stuff. I love to meet people. So if you feel like there's anything that you have to share with me, anything that you are curious about, just reach out. I'd love to talk to you.
And just to add to that, Kevin, if anybody has any specific astrology questions, please email Kevin, and, we may even potentially invite you on to this, podcast that we do, and actually look at your specific chart and, invite you onto the Zoom so that, you could be part of the conversation. So definitely reach out, because we're hoping to kind of grow this astrology community and really engage with people.
Welcome, and today we're going to be discussing when the progressed sun makes an aspect to an outer planet. And this is a useful tool in doing predictive astrology and working with progressions.
And so this is a particularly relevant point when the progressed sun makes an aspect to an outer planet. So here is a friend of mine who's also a client, or was a client. So I'm going to pull up her natal chart. So in her birth chart, her Neptune's at 4 degrees and 12 minutes. In her progressed chart, her Neptune is at 5 degrees and 31 minutes. So in her progressed chart, her Neptune has moved like 1 1/3 degree or 1 degree in 20 minutes, roughly. She's actually got quite a bit going on in her progressed chart. So in her progressed chart, her sun is conjunct Neptune. And so it would have gotten to within 2 degrees of her natal Neptune, her natal Neptune being at 4 degrees when it got to 2 degrees. And then it will get outside of that 2 degree orb from her progressed Neptune in roughly 2 years, when her progressed sun gets like 7.5 degrees. And so because you have the aspect to first the natal planet and then the progressed planet, it adds to that duration. So for her, she's having this experience of progressed sun conjunct Neptune for roughly 5 years. And like I said, the orbs on this is still, like, more research is needed. These are less common things that are relevant in the progressed chart. Don't happen as often as transits. When it does happen, it especially with the progressed sun with an outer planet, it's a fairly long period of time. And so say it was involving Uranus will move a little bit faster, Saturn even more fast. So Saturn could cover, say, 4 or 5 degrees in somebody's progressed chart, depending on how old they are. In my chart, it's been like 3 degrees. So when the sun makes an aspect, it'll first make an aspect to either the natal or the progressed, depending on if that planet is direct or retrograde. And then it'll make an aspect to the other, So if the planet's direct, first it'll be to the natal planet, then the progressed planet. If it's retrograde, the opposite would be true.
So the best use of like this energy, I guess, would be finding a way for like spirituality or like higher level thinking, so because it's in her 11th house, it might be.
Well, it's not in her natal 11th.
Okay.
So it's in her natal first house. So that's also, remember, we're looking at the natal house, not the progressed house. Mm-hmm. The progressed sun will usually stay in the same progressed house. The progressed ascendant will move at roughly the same rate as the progressed sun. So you're looking at it in the first house. And so she was a coaching client of mine, and as well as an astrology client. So with this particular aspect, which I happen to be an expert on, this I have this in my birth chart. It's about working with the energy of that planet. So in this case, Neptune. So working with your sensitivity, developing empathy, but also developing a certain level of resilience to that empathy, to be able to feel your feelings and then move through them and let them go and continue living. Also to find Neptunian outlets, meditation, energy work, art, music, dance, not drugs and alcohol, because that's the other thing that, in your more typical person who I don't attract for the most part, but I could. You might see somebody start watching TV more, or drinking more, or smoking more pot, or doing other things that they probably wouldn't tell anybody about.
It's just like basically escapism.
Yeah, like dysfunctional type escapist behaviors. So it's interesting for her is she's also at the same time got a progressed moon moving through, first making a conjunction to Pluto, then to Venus. In her birth chart, her sun is in Scorpio. So, Scorpio is, so her progressed moon will then later make a conjunction to her natal sun. She also had Mercury, which now it's separating, but a year or two ago was conjunct her progressed Neptune, which would have then also been conjunct her natal Neptune, Uranus. So first conjunct natal Uranus, then progressed Uranus. So she's kind of coming out of that energy, which would have also been running as she was beginning the Neptunian energy. So those are two things that they're happening at the same time, which are quite significant. And her natal Uranus is at 21 degrees, I think. Let's see. Yeah, 21 degrees, also near ascendant. Her birth time's not for sure exact. But Uranus is important, assuming that her birth time is relatively accurate, because her natal Uranus would be conjunct her ascendant. So that also energizes Uranus. And so this is an example of where the progressed chart is going to be relevant. Her progressed Mars is also then making an exact square to her natal Uranus, which roughly 4 years ago, or maybe 5-6 years ago, you had Mercury moving through the square to, so progress Mercury square progress Mars and Jupiter. So yeah, that's all going on right now. And then she's also got transits, where she did have transits going on at the same time. For her, there was her sun is at her natal sun is the end of Scorpio. So there was eclipses. There was a total lunar eclipse, I think within a couple degrees, I think 3 degrees of her sun, as well as I think it was a total lunar eclipse on her birthday, or like the day before her birthday, 6 months prior to that. So that was going on simultaneously to these progressions going on. So you have these three factors, none of which are transits, other than the transit of the nodes that were going on. In addition to that, she will be having transiting Uranus next year, in the year after, making an opposition to her natal sun. And then, I think, and then I guess transiting Neptune was trine to her natal sun. So this would be an example of when there's a lot of very relevant information that's predictive astrology that if you're just looking at transits, you wouldn't have seen it. And she was my client, so I know a lot about what's going on in her life, and she was going through a lot, very, very significant things that I think it's unlikely anybody would have predicted the exact kind of quality of it. But it was a pivotal period in her life, and the work that she did with me being fairly adept. I also have in my birth chart, Mercury and Uranus are exactly conjunct in Sagittarius in my birth chart. So these are two energies. My sun is exactly or closely conjunct to Neptune. My Mercury and Uranus are also closely conjunct. So she was going through that in her progress chart, which was a very kind of disruptive energy. And she managed to go through all of that very consciously and to use it to create very beneficial changes. In talking to one of her friends more recently, her friend said something to the effect of like, yeah, she's very different now in a better way. So she worked well with it, and she's not done with it, by the way. She's got another 2 years or so of this Neptunian energy being very potent. So my hope for her is that she'll find some spiritual, empathic, creative outlet to really channel that. And this is occurring in her natal first house. So this very much could become like kind of part of her identity.
Yeah. And I mean, based, just looking at her age, she's in her 30s. So, I mean, who knows, that could also be career related, some kind of transformation.
Yeah. And that is something that we had talked about, I think. Let's see, in a birth chart. Yeah, her well, she's got the node. She got the south node going over midheaven, but no real transits going to her midheaven. So you could look to her Venus. Actually, the upcoming lunar eclipse will be opposite her Venus. But yeah, no huge. Well, interestingly, so this is also another factor that's relevant here. In her birth chart, her Venus at 5 degrees would be sextile this exact conjunction, which could actually affect her career, being that Venus rules Libra, where her midheaven is, and Venus is in her 10th house. Yeah.
And I think, and you're not going into detail about, the exact specifics in her life, obviously, for her privacy reasons, but I think this is just a good reminder to people, even when you see these kind of progressions or transits, that, it is an opportunity to transform in a positive way, even though it's probably going to take some work and you being conscious of it. Because if you become unconscious of it, that's when people go more towards like the escapism.
Yeah, what I can say of any of these factors in the natal chart or in predictive astrology, the medicine, as far as I understand it, it's always consciousness. And so what I mean by that is most people, and I think it's starting to change slowly, just a little bit at a time, but most people live their entire life kind of where behavior and the way they feel, the way they think, and what they believe happens automatically. It's not like there's choice involved. So we all like to believe in free will, but if you really study yourself, you'll find that you're not making nearly as many choices as you like to think. And so the path, my belief is by doing this transformational healing work, ultimately the greatest gift that you get from it is the ability to make a choice. And it's not comfortable. Interestingly, if you look at like groups when decisions need to be made, most people don't want to actually make a decision. They want to say, oh, you figure it out. You somebody else, you make that decision. In this example, the Sun and Neptune, they don't blend easily. Really, the Sun, I don't think, blends with any of the outer planets. I'd say it mixes nicely with Jupiter, or it can. But really, from Saturn out, I'd say maybe it can mix with Pluto, though Uranus and Neptune doesn't mix. And Pluto can kind of go either way. I mean, you could say it could go either way with anything. The medicine for all of this is like, how consciously are you going to experience whatever comes up? So being an astrologer, I can look at this and say, this is going to be a significant time in your life. And we can talk about the energy. So in her case, Neptune, but also the blend of Mercury and Uranus. And, I happen to know quite a bit about that just in my own personal experience with myself. You think Uranus as like the more cosmic mind, to where Mercury would be the more mundane mind. So how do you blend that? And so for me, astrology, psychology, metaphysics, consciousness, like that's how I manifest that. But like any of the sciences that are maybe more unconventional, or maybe seeking to include new science into old science, which doesn't go over well in the mainstream for the most part. It might
the
be
science is settled, Kevin.
it might be somebody who just reads scientific, like the peer-reviewed literature, right? I mean, if you just read like Science, Nature, these big peer-reviewed scientific journals, you just read all of them. When they come out, I think they come out once a month. I'm not exactly sure. And you just said, okay, this study now indicates that what's being taught in universities needs to be updated, because that, this, whatever this is proving, means that can't be true.
Yeah, I saw this thing. It was on Netflix. It was called Ancient Apocalypse.
Oh, yeah,
and it was really interesting.
Yeah,
because it tied into astrology. And basically, it was this whole idea that we've been taught, how humans formed. We started, on walking on four limbs, and then we stand up, and that whole like caveman to human diagram that everybody's seen. But basically, this one, he calls himself kind of a journalist. He had hypothesized that there were very advanced ancient civilizations that dated back to 30,000 years before Christ, that were essentially wiped out. And basically he was saying that there may have been just simple hunter-gatherers civilizations living alongside very advanced civilizations, and that the advanced civilizations were actually able to teach. But basically they had built all these megaliths, and they were all, pointed towards certain constellations. And it was really interesting. But basically he was saying that it's almost impossible for any archaeologists or any scientists to even really be willing to accept this as even a hypothesis, that it's just the science is settled. Yeah. This is how it is. And there's just no possibility that there was an advanced civilization that was wiped out.
Which, I mean, if you look at the evidence, it's unequivocally, unarguably, from my perspective, clear that whoever built these things built them a long time ago, well before what mainstream says was the beginning of civilized humanity. The guy who discovered Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, mm-hmm. which is this a small, or a city of these monolithic structures made of stones weighing over 20 tons.
Is that the one in Turkey where it's underground?
Yeah, it's buried. Yeah. So they've just begun excavating it. But they can use technology to see that there are more structures. And I don't know, there's something in archaeology where for some reason they're able to tell that it's a minimum of 11 or 12,000 or 13,000 years old. It must be with how it's buried. I don't completely understand it, how they can know for sure. But Göbekli Tepe is the first one that they can use archaeological science to say it has to be a minimum of 12 or 13,000 or 11, whatever it is, well older than what mainstream teaches is the beginning of civilized, cities and cultures and things like that. But that's just one example. Now that the ice is melting in Antarctica, there are these huge structures that can be seen in satellites. That we kind of went off on a little tangent there, which I like to do. I think you do too. But so that's another example of how the energy of Mercury and Uranus could show up in being somebody like Ray Braden or Graham Hancock, or these people who are presenting scientific information to prove that this is what may be going on here.
It's like this thinking outside the box kind of.
Thinking outside the box, that kind of, that more transcendent mind, so yeah, that was a good example of predictive astrology, where if you're just looking at transits, you're not going to really see much. And like, I can tell you what she was going through in that period of life, just like, not only the circumstances, but the way she was experiencing those circumstances was very challenging. It was the time of her life that, like, in 30 years from now, she's going to look back and be like, oh yeah, 2021, 22, like that was pretty hard. And I worked through it, and I did some really profound work, and I'm a totally different, much more mature person now because I did that work. So she's an example of someone who did the work and experienced deep healing and transformation as a result of it.